Adrian Newey left the most dominant team in Formula One to build Aston Martin's future. Honda returned to power a brand new era. Hundreds of millions were invested. A brand new factory was built. And everything, absolutely everything, was designed for the 2026 regulation reset. But on the very first day of the season in Australia, the entire project showed signs of collapse. Fernando Alonso did not even run in the first practice session. Lance Stroll managed only 3 laps before the car was called back to the garage. And when Aston Martin finally ran both cars later in the day, they were almost 5 seconds slower than the leaders. 5 seconds. That is not a small problem. That is a crisis. Because the real issue is not just speed. According to Adrian Newey himself, the Honda power unit is suffering from severe vibration problems that are damaging the battery system and limiting the hybrid power of the car. And here is the part that shocked the entire paddock. The team only has 2 battery packs available for the entire race weekend. If one fails, the car may not even be able to run. Which means the team that was supposed to challenge for the championship is suddenly facing a terrifying question. Can the AMR26 even survive a full race distance? And what Adrian Newey revealed after the first day in Australia might explain why this situation is far more serious than anyone expected. So before we break down exactly what went wrong inside Aston Martin's garage today, and why the Honda engine could be at the center of the problem, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because the 2026 Formula One season has just begun. And this story could become one of the biggest shocks of the entire year. The first practice session in Melbourne was supposed to be routine. New cars on track. Drivers learning the limits. Engineers collecting the first real data of the season. But inside the Aston Martin garage, something was already wrong before the session even began. Fernando Alonso's car never left the garage. Mechanics surrounded the AMR26 while engineers studied the telemetry, and only minutes before the green light, the team confirmed what nobody wanted to hear. A potential power unit issue had been detected. And as a precaution, Alonso would not run in the first practice session. For a team that already arrived in Australia with very limited testing mileage, that decision immediately created a serious problem. Because the first sessions of a new regulation era are incredibly valuable. Every lap provides information. Cooling data. Energy recovery behavior. Tire degradation. Balance of the car. Losing an entire session means losing hours of critical understanding. But the situation became even more concerning when Lance Stroll finally left the garage. The AMR26 rolled onto the track for the first time in an official Formula One weekend. Everyone in the paddock was watching. Newey's first Aston Martin for the new era. The Honda-powered project that had been built for years. And just a few minutes later, the car was back in the pit lane. 3 laps. That was all Stroll managed before engineers told him to return immediately to the garage. No long run. No performance push. Just 3 exploratory laps before the car disappeared behind the garage doors again. At that moment, the message was clear. The problems Aston Martin experienced during winter testing had not disappeared. They had followed the team all the way to Melbourne. And the center of the problem, once again, pointed toward the same component. The Honda power unit. More specifically, the hybrid system and the battery pack integrated into the car. Because according to multiple reports from inside the paddock, the AMR26 is suffering from a very unusual technical issue. Severe vibrations coming from the engine. Not the normal vibrations every engine produces. Stronger. More aggressive. And those vibrations are traveling through the structure of the car. Through the gearbox. Through the chassis. And eventually into the battery system. That battery is not just another component. Under the new regulations introduced this season, the electrical system plays a massive role in the total performance of the car. Energy recovered during braking is stored inside the battery. Then it is deployed during acceleration to provide additional power. If the battery cannot operate correctly, the entire hybrid system becomes unstable. And when that happens, the car loses a huge portion of its performance. But that is not the only danger. Because the vibrations do not just reduce efficiency. They can physically damage the battery pack. And here is where the situation becomes even more delicate for Aston Martin. The team only has 2 battery packs available for the entire race weekend. 2. One installed in Alonso's car. And one installed in Stroll's car. There are no spare units ready to be used if something goes wrong. Which means every lap completed during practice carries a certain level of risk. Push too hard, and the vibrations could damage the battery. Damage the battery, and the team may not even be able to continue running. This is why the Aston Martin engineers were extremely cautious throughout the day. They were not chasing lap times. They were protecting the car. Short runs. Limited power deployment. constant monitoring of vibration levels. And even with those precautions, the data coming from the car still raised serious concerns. Because this is not a simple setup issue that can be fixed with a few adjustments. According to Adrian Newey himself, the problem is structural. It is related to how the Honda power unit interacts with the rest of the car. Which means the solution may require far more than small tweaks. It may require redesign. And that is exactly why what happened later in the day during the second practice session became so revealing. Because even when the car finally ran longer stints, the lap times told a story that nobody inside Aston Martin wanted to see. When the second practice session began in Melbourne, Aston Martin finally managed to run both cars. For the first time all day, the AMR26 was circulating consistently. Engineers were watching every line of telemetry, every vibration reading, every energy deployment cycle. Because this session would reveal something extremely important. Was the car simply suffering from early reliability problems? Or was the performance itself fundamentally compromised? And after 1 hour of running, the answer became painfully clear. Yes, the cars finished the session. Yes, the battery survived. But the lap times were devastating. Almost 5 seconds slower than the fastest car on track. 5 seconds. In Formula 1 terms, that is not a small gap. That is the difference between fighting for the front rows and barely escaping the back of the grid. And the numbers raised a terrifying possibility inside the paddock. The 107% rule. In Formula 1 qualifying, drivers must set a lap within 107% of the fastest time to be allowed to start the race. Normally that rule only becomes relevant for completely uncompetitive teams. But the pace Aston Martin showed on the first day in Australia suddenly made people ask the question nobody expected. Could Aston Martin actually struggle to qualify for the race? Just a year ago, that scenario would have sounded absurd. This is a team with massive investment. One of the most advanced factories in the sport. Fernando Alonso behind the wheel. And Adrian Newey designing the car. Everything about the project suggested a team preparing to fight at the front of the grid. Instead, the first day of the new era revealed a completely different picture. A car running extremely limited programs. Drivers unable to push. And engineers prioritizing survival of the hardware over performance. But what makes this situation even more fascinating is that the problem might not actually be the aerodynamics of the car. In fact, several engineers in the paddock believe the opposite. They believe Adrian Newey's chassis concept could be extremely ambitious, possibly even very clever. The AMR26 is believed to feature extremely aggressive packaging, very tight bodywork, components packed closer together than in most rival cars. That kind of architecture can produce extraordinary aerodynamic efficiency, cleaner airflow, higher downforce, better cornering performance. But aggressive packaging also comes with a price. It reduces the margin for error. Every component must behave exactly as predicted. The engine, the cooling system, the hybrid unit, the battery. If even one of those elements behaves differently than expected, the entire balance of the car can be disrupted. And according to several reports coming from inside the paddock, that may be exactly what happened with the Honda power unit. Because the vibrations generated by the engine were stronger than anticipated during development. Those vibrations began affecting the battery pack. The battery pack began struggling to maintain stable energy deployment. And suddenly the car could not use its full electrical power during the lap. That detail changes everything. Because under the new regulations introduced this season, electrical power represents a massive portion of the car's total performance. If the hybrid system cannot deploy energy correctly, the car loses a huge amount of acceleration. Which explains something many fans noticed during practice. The Aston Martin looked unusually slow on the straights. It was not just corner speed. The car seemed to struggle when accelerating out of corners. And that is exactly what happens when the hybrid boost cannot be fully deployed. The driver presses the throttle. But the electric power that should support the engine is simply not there. Which means the lap times we saw today might not represent the real potential of the AMR26. The team may be deliberately limiting the power unit just to protect the battery system from further damage. In other words, the car might be running in a protective configuration. A mode designed to keep the hardware alive, not to set fast laps. And if that is true, the real performance of the car is still a mystery. But there is another detail from Adrian Newey's comments today that makes the situation even more dramatic. Because according to several reports, solving this problem may take far longer than one race weekend. In fact, some estimates inside the team suggest that it could take several months before the Honda power unit and the battery system work together properly. Months. Which means the story of Aston Martin's 2026 season might already be taking a very unexpected direction. Because instead of starting the new era fighting for victories, they may spend the early part of the year simply trying to make the car usable. And this is where Adrian Newey's words in Melbourne suddenly changed the entire perspective of the story. Because when the legendary designer spoke to the media before the weekend, he did not try to hide the seriousness of the situation. In fact, he admitted something that almost nobody expected to hear this early in the season. The problem is not just performance. It is structural. According to Newey, the vibrations coming from the Honda power unit are so strong that they travel through the chassis and reach the cockpit itself. And that creates a completely different level of concern. Because it means the issue is not limited to the engine department. It affects the entire car. The suspension, the gearbox, the battery system, even the driver. Fernando Alonso revealed that during longer runs he started feeling parts of his hands and arms becoming numb because of the vibrations coming through the steering wheel. That is not something drivers normally talk about in modern Formula One. These cars are extremely refined machines. Yes, they are fast. Yes, they are physically demanding. But they are not supposed to shake so violently that drivers lose feeling in their hands. Yet that is exactly what Aston Martin's drivers are experiencing right now. And that led to one of the most shocking concerns raised inside the team. If the vibration levels remain this high, completing an entire race distance could become physically dangerous. The Australian Grand Prix is 58 laps. Nearly 2 hours inside the cockpit. If the steering wheel continues transmitting those vibrations into the driver's arms and hands, the physical consequences could become serious. Which is why the team has already discussed extreme scenarios. Not pushing the car during certain phases of the race. Retiring early if the vibrations become worse. Or in the most dramatic case, reconsidering participation if the situation does not improve. That is how serious the issue has become. And remember something important. This is not happening to a small team with limited resources. This is Aston Martin. A team that built its entire future around this project. Lawrence Stroll invested enormous amounts of money. He recruited top engineers from across the paddock. He built a completely new headquarters. And he convinced Adrian Newey to join the team after years of dominance with Red Bull. Everything was designed for one moment. The 2026 regulation reset.